Lisa, as an expert in building great cultures among organizations, are we experiencing a leadership crisis that has led to poor culture in organizations? Or is it just my impression?
Gosh, I feel like that's one of those things where I want to say yes and no, because I think in places or spaces, if you're sitting here listening, you're like, I don't have a leader that's like that, or I'm not experiencing that sort of crisis. You'd probably answer like, no, I don't think we are. But I know that there's a lot of organizations that are facing poor leadership. And I think it's a combination of not being trained, it's a combination of not, how should I say, like putting themselves in their people's shoes. And I think sometimes the organization's just moving so fast and furious that it's hard to be a good leader. I've been there. There's a lot of things that are required and we have to get a lot done. And sometimes you just think, let's get it done. We'll worry about the people part later. And of course, then at the end, you're left with a crisis. So I would answer that yes, but also no, because there are good leaders out there. You just have to look for them.
Hmm. Interesting. I think after I asked the question and after hearing your answer, I realized that I was probably a little bit too vague when it came to poor culture. Since we're in
Mhm.
the culture thing, let's just define, if possible, what a great culture, what a great company culture is, and and
Yeah.
and the key ingredients of creating one. Because to me, I feel like a lot of people just like, okay, it's very subjective things. Okay, for some people that might be, I can give an example. If you work at Tesla, SpaceX, or one of those, you probably feel, okay, this is like a horrible company culture, but it doesn't fit who you are as a person. But there are
Mhm.
other people who are just, highly inspired by that. So I understand those extremes,
Yeah.
where for you might not be, or for you or me might not be like a good company culture, but for other
Mhm.
ones would be, hey, we're doing awesome things, we're just breaking barriers. Great. But in general, what would
Yeah.
be like the key ingredients of a great company culture?
I would say so. When I define culture, one of my favorite definitions is culture is all of the ways of being. And whether you look at a society as a culture or you look at Department X as a culture, it truly boils down to all the ways of being, your habits, your traditions, your behaviors, your attitudes. I do a lot of keynote speaking and leadership training on, and I actually, during the presentation, I say, hey, okay, everyone in the room, I want you to think about the group of people that you work with, whether it's a department or maybe there's, I worked in healthcare. So we had groups of roles like nurses, but they weren't their own department. And I would say to them, okay, does everybody have a group in mind? And they all nod their heads. And I say, okay, I want you to think about, you're going to get time to analyze this culture. You're going to get time to think about how are these humans doing? And so I ask them in three areas: attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs. And I say, how are they doing right now? How's their attitude? And a lot of people in the room give me the like, oh, we're not doing great. We're frustrated or we're burnt out. And then I'll say, okay, what about our behaviors? What behaviors do we see? Do we see things like, we walk out of a meeting and we look at each other and think, well, that could have been an email. That was a waste, right? Or do we have behaviors where people are complaining at the start of a meeting? When you say like, how are you today? And they're like, oh, I'm busy, so busy, right? Like you can look at the attitudes, how people are feeling, and then the behaviors, like what are they doing? And then if you look at the beliefs of a culture, meaning, if someone says, oh, nothing changes around here, or yeah, leadership doesn't care about that. If you start to examine, almost like Inspector Gadget what would you call it? Like a microscope to kind of say, what are we showing up as? How are we behaving? And what do we believe? I think the keys to a good culture are there. A lot of times when I led teams, I was always tinkering, almost like as if I had a wrench of like, or a soundboard on a music soundboard that I was like, we got to turn this up and we got to turn this down. If we want a good culture, we do not complain. If we want a good culture, right, we got to stop behaving in such a way. And so that was the way that I really taught my team to identify the areas that we wanted to fix and the things that we wanted to keep. There were some pretty amazing things that we had. And so I don't know if that specifically answers your question, because I think each industry, each department is going to have a different version of that, but it's truly, truly, truly in all of the ways of being, whether it's traditions, habits, attitudes, behaviors, beliefs. That's really the tinkering spot that is going to lead to better culture.
Yes, I can understand how obviously it depends on the industry, it depends on the sector, it depends on the there are many different factors that as I was mentioning earlier that some companies might be quote unquote bad culture for some people, might could be good for other
Yeah.
ones. But now again, since to me it feels like a culture is defined or shaped by their leaders,
Mhm.
in your mind or in your opinion, what are the core psychological traits that define great leaders?
Yeah. I think that there are a couple. The first being, and I know some people might be like, Lisa, that's not a great trait, but I'm going to give you some of the things that I have found to be really helpful. The first one is being organized. I think that if you're not organized enough to where, and I say organized kind of almost in quotes of like high level, if you can't zoom in and zoom out of like, what's the fire of the day, right? Like, where is something burning? And being able to kind of zoom out and say, does this need my attention now or does this need my attention later? That ability to like be organized and zoom in and zoom out on kind of prioritization, I think is key. I think the second thing is really being able to detach from your emotions a little bit. And what I mean by that is you should operate from the head and the heart on certain things, but not always one or the other or both. And what I mean by that is sometimes, something would occur and I would have to say to myself, how much energy does this get? Like, do I get to be stressed about this? Or is this something where I can kind of say, we're not going to be hair on fire. We can't. And so that ability to really kind of almost take your emotions and look at them as if they were in your hand of like, okay, how much energy are we going to give to this? What does this deserve? And I think if you don't have that ability, you are going to be burnt out because you're going to be running around like a crazy person thinking there's a fire, there's a fire. And then the third one and final one I would say is the ability to try on other people's glasses, the ability to actually look from their lens. I had a team member who was really upset about our ice machine in our break room. I was like my second week as a leader. I walk into the break room. She has her back to me and she's telling two other team members about the fact that the ice machine that was there 2 days ago is now gone. And this is a symbol of leadership and all of the things that they do to us. I'm sitting there listening. I'm like brand new to the department. And a little part of me is like, oh, now I'm upset. And she turns around embarrassed because she can see like, oh gosh, I was just basically saying that leadership doesn't care about anything around here. And, here I am, the new leader. And I said to her, I'm not sure where the ice machine went, but let me find out. Now, I went to our administrative assistant. And I was like, Angela, where did this ice machine go? She goes, oh, it's just out being cleaned. It'll be back on Thursday. And I was like, number one, I was like, oh, thank goodness. And then I went back to that team member and I said, hey, good news. The ice machine is coming back. But tell me a little bit about like how you got to feel the way that you feel. You took an ice machine as a symbol of leadership not caring. And I really had to understand like some of the things that had happened to her over the course of her 30 years at the organization to realize, oh, this isn't about the ice machine at all. And so I think those are really, really important skills that if you don't have them, maybe you're thinking like, oh, I should build them. But I think if you're not able to be able to zoom in and zoom out, detach from your emotions a little bit and be able to look from their angle, I think those are three really, really key components of a good leader.
I love that breakdown. Obviously, you need organizations. You need to understand. You need to be organized. You need to understand what the most important next step is, right? Because
Yeah.
if you're all over the place, you're not leading a company. You're not leading a
Right.
team. It's just like it's hard.
It is hard.
It is tough because I mean, it's like then everyone is doing a lot of different things and nothing at all. So
Exactly.
I definitely see that point. When it comes to detaching from an emotions, I think it's a key for almost anybody. You have to have that emotional regulation. You need to just instead
Yeah.
of having that knee jerk reaction, you just need to just take a deep breath. Okay, it is hard. It is
It's
hard to
so
master.
hard.
And I don't know how many people are actually aware that they're controlled by their emotions. They're controlled by their
Yeah.
body, and they feel that they might be in control, but we are emotional animals, and if we don't
Mhm.
control them, they're gonna control us. And the last point, which to me is like key, and I don't, once again, we sort of kind of know that, but you really just pointed out, which is having the level of empathy, but not empathy from, oh, I can feel how you feel. No, let me try to understand how you see the world. Let me
Yes.
really, really, because everyone, we all have a different lenses.
Yeah.
And when you say, okay, probably her reaction was an overreaction, maybe, but then I need to understand why. Instead of judging
Yeah.
her, let me understand to understand why. And as you said, there's always a deeper issue, and that requires work. And I
Yeah.
feel that many people are too lazy to actually do that work. But then if you start
Yeah.
planting those seeds, then eventually you build a strong foundation that you can just lead your team to, new heights.
I would agree. And I think you use the word lazy. And I want to say like two things. I think there's many people who are lazy. I think there's other people that are scared. Like I do a lot of leadership coaching and I'll say like, well, did you ask them what they were thinking? And they're like, no, because I didn't know what to do with what they said. If it turned into a complaint fest or it turned into them getting upset, like I wouldn't know what to do with that. And I think there's almost that second layer of communication that I think it's some people, sure, lazy, absolutely. They're like, I don't care. But I think the people that do care, they are just like, I don't want to get myself into a conversation where someone's really overwhelmed, overheated, because I don't know what to do next. And I often talk about kind of strategizing it before it happens. So if you're going to ask someone why they're mad about the ice machine, and you know that they're probably going to go back on that rant of like, leadership doesn't care about us, like, be ready for that. And also be thinking, I would say, like, you can prep your energy to be thinking when they get upset, I'm going to sit there and my only job is to listen. And after they are done, I'm going to paraphrase back to them what I heard. And I'm not going to let my energy go up when theirs goes up. And I think that people struggle with that. And I don't know if it's an innate characteristic that people have, but when someone gets upset in my presence, I get curious. Like, that's the thing that I get. I'm like, oh, this made you so mad. I don't get mad back. And I think some people get mad back. And so then they're like, well, I don't want to get into conversation because then I'll get mad and then they'll get mad and it like escalates. And so I think there's a layer of like second layer communication that people don't maybe know how to do and or don't prepare for. They just get into a conversation and then it's like kind of escalates and then everyone's like screw that and they just walk out the room and they're like we didn't solve anything. And I don't know, that just maybe that's me, but I noticed that when I was training my supervisors who were underneath of me, they didn't have that skill. They'd come in my office and they'd be like, I brought this up to them. And then they just got mad. And then I was like, what did you do? And they're like, I just got mad too. And I was like, oh, that wasn't probably the best way.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think, well, one has to do a lot with emotional intelligence.
It
Obviously,
does,
you
yeah.
need to, but at the same time, when you were saying, I was thinking when you said that if somebody gets mad, you get curious, but most people would get mad as well. And I started thinking that the only reason why you would get mad is that what the other person is saying is attacking your identity. Your
Yeah, yeah.
So if you as a leader, you can reframe that it's not about you, it's
It's
not
not
about
about you.
attacking you, it's not about attacking you, even though since you're the leader, you're the face of the team, you're the face of the organization. It's not about who you are as a person. And again, I understand the ego and the self, and then anything that threats our identity, we're just gonna
Yeah.
feel it, and we want to push back. But if, like as you said, earlier, if we can control our emotions, and then okay, let me try to understand, let me get curious. And this is something that I have repeated too many times on this podcast, but so many people I've talked to about different things, whether it's when it comes to relationships, dating, procrastination, narcissism, anything. It seems like it goes down to most problems in life. or internal problems can be solved with just curiosity. It's almost like
I know.
the more curious you get, you can from your internal to the external world as well. It's like fascinating.
It is. I that was a really well said statement because if it's not, I always just think what they're angry about doesn't necessarily mean it's about me. And so I love your statement about getting curious in general, because I think even when I think about our political climate, our religious climate, like all of these really hard problems that we're unable to solve, you can watch it play out. Group A, it says this, group B says that. And then it's like, whoo, look where that went. And I think if people were a little bit more curious, they have like, how did it get that way? Like, how did you get that way? Like, what in your lifetime did you see, feel, experience to feel that that was the way? I think curiosity, like you said, would solve, gosh, we could just solve all the things.
Yes, and but not only curiosity about how why the other person is reacting the way that they do, but why am I being triggered, and what's
Yeah.
underneath that, which leads me to these questions, like based on that, based on what triggers us, and getting curious, which is attached to stories we have told ourselves and all of that. In based on what you have seen, based with the people that you have worked with, what are the most common limiting beliefs leaders struggle with, and how can they reframe them for success?
Ooh, limiting beliefs. That is a good one. I think one of the limiting beliefs that leaders often carry is that they have to be responsible for everything. And I think that if you reframe that almost like a little nuance of, you are not responsible for everything. Your team is responsible for everything. And your job is to like help them. I think that if there's a shift in perspective, leaders do a lot better. Because I watch a lot of leaders being like, well, I have to double check that and I have to look at that. And I'm like, ooh, you're going to probably go on a burnout journey if you have to be responsible for everything. And I think that's probably one of the major ones. Other limiting beliefs, I would say, I think that, and maybe this isn't a limiting belief, but I think it's a thought going into being a leader, that if you get into leadership thinking that it's going to be one way and then it's not, I think there's a defining moment when you get into leadership and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm responsible for a lot more of like the emotions of people and like how they're performing rather than outcome. Because we always think like, I'm going to be a good leader and we're going to do all of these things. And I'm like, ooh, that stop. Because that's not actually what you're going to be doing. You're going to be actually helping people through an experience. How does that sound? And they're like, well, I'm just going to set our course and then we're going to meet it. And I'm like, ooh, that's not leadership. Leadership's about helping people through experiences, giving them skills. It's hard. And so I think those would be two areas that immediately come to mind. Maybe the third and final one would be that working hard and getting things done is the main priority. And I say that in a funny way because I saw teams that worked really hard, but they hated their lives. Like, we got a lot done, but it about killed us in the process. And so I wrote a book called Joy is My Job. And it's this idea that if you wait for joy to find you, you're going to wait forever. And it really started in my personal life because my husband and I were burnt out. And it really quickly spilled into my professional lives where we made time for a little bit of like fun and joy, whether it was like 2 minutes at the beginning of our meeting and at the end. And I think that sometimes leaders think getting things done is the key. And I think that's a limiting belief. I think you have to have both a little bit of fun. And I always say like work hard, play hard if you want to be successful. So those are probably the three thoughts on that. One of which, again, not a limiting belief, just more of a belief going in. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to the last one, because I think it's a story that a lot of us have, especially in this country. Like, we need to hustle, we need to work, we need to stay
Yeah.
busy, we need to go. If not, we might not even make it. So even with all the hard work, we might make it. But if we don't, if we slow down, if we play it, if we stop, if we rest, we're there's no way we can make it. And last year I faced up. I mean, I was burned like 4 different times. Like, okay, I cannot keep this pace. At some point, I need
Yeah.
to do something. But also at the same time, because I interviewed a couple of weeks ago this lady about burnout. Like, is when I'm trying to rest, when I'm trying to take a day off, I don't know what to do with myself. So that's on me.
Yeah.
I need to learn how to do that. But one thing that you said, I think was the second one, if I'm not mistaken. I think that maybe might be a limiting belief, or maybe it would be a having the wrong concept of leadership, because it sounded like what those people think leadership is actually management that only works for fast food restaurants, or even
Yes.
in manufacturers, right? When you're creating, when you have a process to follow and that's it. But most organizations, you need to lead a team. You won't have all the answers as a leader.
Yeah.
That's why you trust your team to come up with the answers. But then I guess that's when the ego, you know gets into, plays a role, that if you feel that you need to have all the answers, then you cannot lead a team, and then you start micromanaging them and not trusting
Hmm.
them, because you are the one who needs to take, or you're the one who needs to know all the answers or all the strategies, and the team is just there to perform, like if you were at a fast food restaurant, or if you
Yeah.
were at a car company, whatever.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that sometimes it comes from a place of good. Like you think to yourself, I'm going to make sure because I want it to be so good. And you come from the right angle or love of leadership, but the execution is, I think, where we sometimes get into challenges where it's like, but what does that cause? Like, what does your behavior cause? And when I ask leaders that, they're like, oh, and I'm like, yeah. So if we want a different cause, we want to cause a different result, we have to do a different action. And what does that action include? And I think that's, again, I think that people are intrinsically good. They just don't have the like thought on, well, what behavior do I need to do to cause the thing I want to happen? And so if we can get back to being like, well, I don't have to be that. The cause I want is that my people do great work. Then, okay, perfect. Let's do a different behavior to get a different result with that, because you cannot be the decider and the thinker and the figure outer of all of these things. It would be impossible. And I think that I do a lot with delegation and helping people think about how do we delegate and what does that experience look like, both for the person delegating, the person that's going to be the delegated to. And we talk a lot about like, how do we show up in those moments and what are we causing? And how do we like throw up the flag and be like, oop, that's not working. So yeah, 100%. I think there's so much to, I guess, chew on in that space. And there's never a situation that's the same. So you're going to have to be a little bit nimble, zoom in and zoom out on, yeah, what am I trying to cause and what do I need to do differently to get there?
And I think that's the reason why most business owners, and by business owners I mean in this particular case, like a small business owners working in the business, not on the business, because
Yes.
it's so hard for them to delegate. They don't trust their team. They don't trust. And I say this from because my dad is one of them. My dad has been an entrepreneur all his life, and I always saw him just being another employee of his company. And to me, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
why can't you just delegate? It was so hard for him to trust other people to
Yeah.
do the things that he was doing. And then again, that's probably a story that, hey, nobody can do it like I do.
Yeah.
And then I mean, hey, if that makes you happy, good, but it could lead you to burnout, one. And two, it will prevent you from really or truly growing.
Mm-hmm.
Either if you're in an organization, growing your team or growing your company. And that, I guess, is a thing that is just, it is hard to see. You can only see it in hindsight. Only when you look
Yeah.
back, it's like, I should have done. Yes, sure. We eh, you know we can all look back and be aware of our mistakes. I think that the whole idea, and one of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you, is like just to try to see it now we don't have to go through the pain to then see it. How can we
Yeah.
just be aware now? And I think that part of the not trusting a team is because you haven't set the foundation for it. So how can leaders foster psychological safety so that
Yeah.
employees feel comfortable sharing ideas and challenges?
I think that first, I often talk about what are your team statements or the things that you say regularly. And I'll use a personal example and then I'll jump to professional. When I call my mom, every single time I talk to her and we hang up the phone, she says these words: be good and be careful. And if she didn't say those words, I would probably think to myself, is she sick? What's wrong with her? But it's like the thing that she always believes, right? Be good and be careful. And she says it to me now that I'm all grown up and have, teenage kids. But she said it to me when I was a little girl. And I think about that team statement, right? That statement that my mom made about our family and what she hoped to see. I always say, like, what are the statements that you're making to your team regularly, to the point where if you were like outside of the room, they would literally be like, be good and be careful, right? Like I could almost like mouth the words of like when she's going to say it. Now, my tagline or team statement was always have good ripple effect. I would say to my team, guys, this is our ecosystem to build, maintain, and protect. We have got to have good ripple effect on our team. Whenever we interviewed new employees or prospective employees, I would say I would interview them and then the team would get to interview them, 3 or 4 people. And I would look at those 3 or 4 people and I would say, it is your job to figure out if this human is going to have good ripple effect. Because if they're not going to, don't invite them on our team. And, I think that it starts with some of those statements that you're making. Other statements that I would often make is that I would say, we're going to learn together. We're going to learn together on this and we're going to try it. We're probably going to need to live in the lab. So like big beaker, science goggles, like we're going to like have a small experiment where we test this out. And if it blows up, it was an experiment. And I think things like that really start to build the culture of safety. So when I give, a person on my team a task, or I'm delegating something, I do it in a bite-sized way where they can live in the lab. Like they know and I know that they're probably going to blow this little baby up. And if it's a small enough bite-sized thing, like the first time my supervisor did payroll alongside of me, right? Like we were both doing it. So there was a safety net, but I wanted her to kind of get in there and blow it up and be like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like, no problem. This is just an experiment. This is how we get you from like failure to success, is you need to go through those motions just like a toddler would when they're learning to walk or crawl. Like you got to put in the work to like fail a little bit so that you can actually do this right and succeed. And so I think a combination of like team statements when there's no risk at hand, right? It's just the day to day, like how are you talking about the work? And then I think it's actually living the work in a way that encourages people. Like if they fail, I'm like high-fiving them because it was a controlled experiment. We wanted to see where we were going to get to. And I know that they feel comfortable and they weren't stressed about learning the task. They were actually stressed about like, how does this work? I needed their brain to catch up and I need to give them some space to do so. And I know that sounds a little bit sunshine and rainbows, but I tell you what, it works. Whether it's payroll or budgets or supplies that you order, start giving them tasks in such a way that encourages them to like learn how to go from walking to crawling. And if they fall on their butt, you're like, get on up here. That's really where I think the trick of it is.
Yeah, it's almost like creating a safe environment for one, asking for help. I'm struggling with that a lot. It's hard for
It's
me
hard,
to
right?
it's hard for me to ask for help, which is rationally is dumb because I could make my life so much, easy. My life could be so much easier if I just ask the questions. But then
Yeah.
I'd rather just spend 5 days trying to figure it out rather than ask one person that it will give me the answers right away. So
Yeah.
that is like one thing, just creating that safety, but also is that creating that safe environment where people are allowed to make mistakes and fail, and just almost like by reframing and letting them know, hey, we all make mistakes, we all fail. Here the point is not to make mistakes or not to fail, but what can we learn from them, and then just reapply. Now sometimes we might make the same mistake once or twice or 30 times. Okay, then at some point it would be kind of like, hey, dude, you kind of need to,
Yes, that's a different conversation. Absolutely. Like it really gets into more of
yeah.
that performance management conversation. But I also know, like, if someone's failing at something a bunch of times, why are you giving them that job? Like, I always say, like, I had two supervisors, one liked to do payroll, the other one didn't. And it was like, why are we trying to shove a square peg in a round hole? So we just did some swapping of duties. And I was like, let's put you in a spot where you can actually use your strengths. Like, you have different strengths. So I think there is some modification that can occur prior to a performance conversation. And certainly when you get into that performance conversation, like, it looks different, it feels different. I rarely had that happen because I was tinkering and tweaking and like moving things around that made sense for the team and for the organization to succeed. And I think sometimes we get in this black and white, well, it has to be this. And I'm like, but why? Like, we're building the team. It's our ecosystem. If it's not working, let's change it.
Yeah, I feel that I feel that society as a whole lives either black or white. It's like
Yeah.
we are in the biggest gray area
Great.
possible. So to me, even going from company culture, from politics and religion, or anything, it's just like either you're with me or you're against me. Either we're doing this or we're not. It's like,
Mhm.
well, what can we just like meet in the middle? Kind of
Can't
find
you
a
be two
way.
things at once?
Yeah, exactly. Both of them can coexist, but then people don't realize that. One very interesting thing that you mentioned was having people that create a positive or good ripple effect. And
Mhm.
I do feel this is quite important when it comes to when you're building a culture. And I do feel, and that's probably my impression, I don't know how accurate this is, that many companies are looking the for employees or for talent that have measurable metrics. Okay, this person
Yeah.
has all the experience, he has like all this background, but how about those intrinsic values? How those hidden metrics that are going to help, like push the organization forward? Those things that only when you do like a deeper evaluation, only when you really try with a team, you can see how beneficial that person was. But many of
Mhm.
those people don't get the chance because don't have the quote unquote the measurable metrics that you want. Like, okay, this person was excellent at doing his job or her job, has all this great experience, but those people might not align with your company culture, or those people might be, even toxic or narcissistic, or who knows. How can leaders just put aside those measurable metrics and focus on the hidden metrics that will enhance a company culture?
Yeah, I when you were first talking it, I immediately went to the interview process. And so when we were interviewing a candidate, I worked for a company that was about 70,000 people. So you can imagine, like, we had SOPs upon SOPs upon SOPs. And if you've ever been in healthcare, you know that there are so many regulations, so much, whether it comes to like how we sterilize equipment, to how we're taking care of patients, to all these things. And so what I always said is, we have organizational rules and then we have house rules. So just like I give the example of when I turned 16, I drove a car, a 93 Grand Prix. She was silver with maroon cloth interior. I mean, she was a beauty. And I remember one of the first times, like, I drive her, I'm driving home from school. I park in the driveway. I walk in, my dad says, hi, you don't park in the driveway. You park on the street. And I was like, what? He goes, house rules. And I was like, right. So it wasn't written in an HR handbook that I, Lisa Even, could not park in the driveway, but there were these house rules, right? These things that we had parameters around. Mom and dad park in the driveway. You do not. And I think the same holds true with how you do interviews, right? Like, if you have the sheet of interview questions that you need to ask because the organization has said these are really great ones to ask, I always say yes. And what are the, 5 to 10 other questions that you're going to be able to ask that would allow you to get into some of that of like, how does this person behave? How does this person approach their work? And what do we need this person to do in their role? So I hired a lot of people from daycares to actually work at my front desk. And it was funny because I had a couple other leaders say, "Well, why are you hiring these daycare people?" And I said, "You know why? Because at daycares and preschools, they are really good with people. They're really good with the parents. They're really bubbly with the kids. And I need someone at that desk who is really good with the parents and really good with the kids. And so it was an interesting thing of like something that I was specifically looking for that wasn't a metric. And I think that if you can get really good at starting to think about what result are we trying to create and what behavior would we need, you can really get some really quality candidates. And if they don't have a great answer to some of those like house type questions that you have, then you're going to know like they are not here to create good ripple effect. Like, let's find someone who will. The other thing I will say is that I tell them that in an interview. I say, hi, the most important thing that you can do on this team is to have good ripple effect. I will say it every day. You will hear it every single day of the week on this team. Tell me, how do you have good ripple effect in the world and in your community? And I pause and I wait for them to give me an example of something that they are already doing. And I say, it can be teeny tiny to, every morning I go and grab my neighbor's newspaper that's at the end of their driveway and I put it on their porch to, we had really good ripple effect because I did project X on this team. Like, I just want to see an example of it. And if they can't pull one, that's an indicator, right? I'm like, thank you so much for coming. Have a great day.
That is a honestly good question, but I think also like a tough question because we don't think too much about those things.
No.
And when you mentioned the question, like I'm sure that I have some moments, and yet I cannot recall. And that's very interesting because once again, we don't think too much about it. And maybe, hey, who knows? Maybe those people did have a good ripple effect, but they were trying to think if I put myself in their shoes or how I would react, I would try to think big macro. Okay, what great impact did I have? Not something like, hey, I just pick up my neighbor's newspaper.
Yes. And I give them that example to show them. And I also say, did you hold the door open when you walked into this clinic for someone? And they'll be like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good ripple effect. But it's my job right out of the gate to start to set that expectation. And I want them, even if it takes I think about like their filing cabinet in their mind, if it takes them 5 minutes to get to something, I'm okay with that. But I want them to know, like, kind of the expectation to be here is that you're a good human. And if you're not, like, don't join us. You won't like it. Because I'm gonna actually be like, hi. The first time I heard someone like self-monitoring someone else, like, hey, is that good ripple effect? I like smiled because I was like, yes, we are actually doing what we need to be doing to hold each other like to a higher standard. Like, we don't need to be doing this. We don't need to be mean to each other. Like, that's not good ripple effect. And I think it starts in the interview. And again, I wasn't necessarily like hard on them, but I wanted them to be thinking like, hi, welcome to the team. This is a part of it. Don't sign up if you don't want to be here.
You know what? I think that even when you ask that question, and even if once you hire them, the fact that you put out every single day, it changes people's perceptions and
Mm-hmm.
lenses. It's almost like instead of focusing on quote unquote the negative things, since we have a negativity bias anyway,
Yeah.
you know, what if we start just drilling every single day? Hey, look for the positive thing. Look for the good ripple effect. What can I do? What other people's acknowledge other people's quote unquote good ripple effects, and that is just almost even changing our brains biochemistry, and just it almost like it spreads out through the entire team.
It does. It's contagious. I remember the first time I had a nurse come to my office. She goes, hey, I was thinking about ripple effect. And I was like, oh, you were? She goes, I was like, my favorite. And she laughed. She goes, shut up, Lisa. I was like, I know. I was like, no, what were you thinking about? And she goes, well, that department that we work with pretty regularly. And I said, yeah. And she goes, can I like make them some cookies and walk it over to them? Like, they were really helpful last week. And it was like, the little part of me was like, wanted to scream at her, yes, like, why are you even asking for permission on this? Like, please just do it. But I knew that it's not something that we normally do. And so, in my mind, I was like thinking that, but my poker face, I just smiled and I said, I think that's a great idea. And so it starts their brain kind of, as you were saying, looking for it. And it also starts giving them like, where else in my day and who else in our orbit needs this? And it was shocking. Like, she brought cookies and then they brought cookies. And it was almost turned into this like little bit of a good ripple effect war of, then they were delivering like, we walked across the hospital a lot. And so they would drop an envelope on their desk of like funny jokes and funny things. And it kind of was this thing where almost as if it was a basketball passing back and forth of like, we were doing fun and funny things for one another. But it just took my team member to kind of be like, hey, I was kind of thinking about it, and it took off. And I think not that it's perfect, because they're certainly in healthcare. I worked in neurosciences, which is like tip of the head to the base of the spine. So you can imagine we're giving people bad news like hour in and hour out, like, hey, you got cancer, hey, you got a tumor, hey, you got this bad disease that you're never getting rid of. And so I say it with a lens of like, this was a really hard environment to work in, and we still found a way in our own industry, in our own department, to figure out like how could we have good ripple effect in really quick bite-sized ways.
Yeah, I love that. It's because you're priming the brain to just look for those
Yeah.
opportunities, look for those things, and just focus on that honestly. Uh, Lisa, I've been having such a great time. I know that we're running short of time, but as a closing question, if you can give either one piece of advice or one thing that leaders could work on that they're kind of like that they don't think too much about it,
Mm.
that it's not in their heads, it's not very common, or it's not evident
Yeah.
that they need to work on, what would that be?
I think, and I know this is going to sound somewhat like some people might be like, no way, Jose, like, no. But I would say, don't take yourself too seriously. And I think we often think like we need to be this buttoned up version to show that we have command and that we're respected and all of these things. And I think there is a level of that. So hear me out. There's a level of like professionalism that you need to have. But I think your team also needs to see you as someone who's a part of the team. Right? Like someone that's like the coach of the team that knows what it's like to be in those hard moments, and that can drop their guard a little bit. Again, I'm not telling you to drop your guard 100. I'm just saying, like, your team needs to feel that you're a real human and that you're relatable, because otherwise they're going to put you at one side of the room and them at the other. Of like, oh, they're not like me. And a lot of people ask me how I could get a lot of my work done when I was a project manager. And I thought to myself, well, it's because I wasn't in a position to be above them. I was alongside of them. We just had different roles and different things and different behaviors that we needed to do. And so if you're sitting there thinking like, my team is toxic, they don't like me, they don't tell me anything, they're quiet in meetings, it's probably because there's a little bit of authority that you probably don't need to be displaying. And if you can get, again, in the right moments with the right amount of finesse, because leadership is all about finesse, if you can start to not take everything so seriously, when something bad happened, I'm like, all right, time out. What do we got to do? Like, what do we got to do? If you can get into more of that energy versus the like, well, we've had this happen and now the consequence is this, right? Like, no one wants that. They want to feel like they're valued and needed. And so if you can put it back on them to be like, all right, what do we got to do? We got to problem solve this. Who's got a good idea? What do we need to do here? You're going to be more successful with having people do things and get things done than if you display a little bit more of posture and like, I am the leader here. It's a really fascinating thing to be able to be in the work with the people that are doing it versus just kind of pointing and being like, we must do this. So don't take your work so seriously that your team then puts you on an island and they don't want to play.
I love that answer. It is not very intuitive how we should react when we are in a leadership position or in a position of power. We feel that now I need to act the part. I need to not be a tyrant, but almost act like one, because the team has to respect me. But they will respect you more if you show that vulnerability. If you show some, hey,
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers. I'm counting on you guys, and it's almost like feeling part of a team rather than, well, we're just following order. So yeah, I mean, love that. I think that if more leaders would just think about that and start working on those things, their company culture could improve exponentially. Lisa, been a wonderful time with you. I wish we could go for longer. Sadly, we cannot. But where can people find you? I know that you're a speaker. You also have a book, a podcast, anything.
Yeah, you can find me at lisaeven.com. And then I'm also on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. So follow me there. And if you have, an idea or a concept that you're like, ooh, I disagree, or you have more thoughts on, the contact us button on lisaeven.com. I love, love, love hearing perspective and stories. So please reach out and yeah, follow along. I'm always learning and looking for, just amazing humans who are having good ripple effect and making joy their job.
Awesome. Perfect. Lisa, once again, thank you so much for coming to the podcast. Enjoyable conversation as usual.
Thank you.